Okay, I'm very excited to be talking to Amanda Abella, who is a millennial financial expert. She also wrote a best-selling book called Make Money Your Honey, which I think is kind of a catchy name. Amanda, tell me something. Why is it, you know a lot about millennials, why is it that they are not really big into investing?
Ooh, okay. So I actually just wrote about this for one of my clients, and let's be real, we came of age during the Great Recession. I get it. I graduated in 2010. I went 6 months without a job too. All my friends are up to their eyeballs in student loan debt. I understand. We saw our parents' retirement savings just disappear basically in the blink of an eye. We saw the financial system just fall apart all around us, and there's kind of like a distrust of that. But with that being said, that didn't stop me from investing in the market. And I encourage millennials to at least learn or use tools like Acorns or Betterment to at least begin investing, because the most valuable thing we have is time, because we're still young and we're really missing out on a lot of money. We're leaving a lot of money on the table if we're not learning how to do that.
What are some of the excuses that they tell you for why they're not getting started, other than I watched the stock market crash when I was in college?
Well, that's a big one.
Okay.
But also, I just don't have the extra cash, I think is one that I hear a lot. To at which point I respond and I'm like, well, there's lots of tools now available that perhaps didn't exist during our parents' time when they were in their 20s, but they exist now thanks to fintech. So you don't actually need a whole lot of money to get started.
So not needing a lot to get started means you could put in, your $5 or your $10 or your $50, your $100. But I mean, let's face it, to make big money, you've got to get money working for you. Do you think this just kind of makes them feel like they're doing something, even though they're not, if they start with such small sums?
Well, I mean, let's talk about compounding interest. You're right, you either need a lot of money or you need a lot of time. Now, fortunately, what we have on our side is time. And the more time you waste not doing it, that's money that you're leaving on the table.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what other tips do you have for millennials to get into the money investing habit? I'm not even talking about money saving at this point.
I think it's important to educate yourself. I think there's a lot of confusing information out there. I was talking with a friend of mine who is a CFP, and he was saying how, maybe we're getting advice from our parents, but the way they did investing was totally different from the way we did it. Like they still had pensions,
Right.
some of them did, which is just not a reality for us. So I think it's just like really learning to educate yourself. I remember the first book I ever read that perhaps talked about this subject was Susie Orman, one of her books. And, maybe I'm not using that advice now, but at least it was a starting point for me. And it kind of opened up that desire for me to go learn more. And as time has gone on, I have figured out what works for me and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that point. I think that it doesn't matter necessarily which system you follow. You just have to follow some reasonable system in order to become a good investor. And it is true that millennials have the benefit of time and compounding interest. I think one of the other issues that a lot of people are facing, especially if they came into money and working right after the crash, the 2008 collapse of the market. So then we are now in the second longest bull market ever. The stock market has been going up for a very, very, very long time. People say, yeah, but if I invest now, it's just going to crash on me. How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, I actually looked up some data on this while I was writing this article for a client. Like, if you look at the data that we have in terms of how the stock market performs, sometimes you have double-digit returns, sometimes you have a 2008, but eventually it all kind of levels itself out. And then that's why the time is so important, right? Because you have the time to write that stuff out. No one can predict the market, right? And then the second thing is you have to make sure that you're actually diversified. And this sounds really confusing to people in the beginning, which is why I say just start somewhere. I started by reading books. I was with one financial institution. Then as I educated myself more, I learned that that financial institution was basically eating up my account in fees. So I moved it somewhere else. This is stuff that we can learn as we go and we can adjust as we go. And that's kind of what you need to do when you're investing is number one, realize that that's just kind of the name of the game, but eventually it all levels itself out. So have that patience, and use that time to your advantage. And then number two, to learn about the strategies or get help from someone else to teach you the strategies so that you can ride out those bumps.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that that one of the things that people often say is when you're young, you have the opportunity to take risks. So people who are just starting should be looking to, really hit a home run on picking the best stock or something like that.
Well, I guess I can only speak from personal experience here. Like, I don't do individual stock investing, me personally. I'm not there yet, right? I started with like target date funds and then moved to index funds because for me, it's not about beating the market. I'm okay with just mirroring the market. I don't have to beat anything because I know you can't, right? Now, that being said, that doesn't mean I'm not going to look into individual stocks later, right? It's just that for right now, this is what works for me. And I think that's an important point. Like, not all investments work for everyone. You have to figure out what works for you.
I hear. We're talking to Amanda Abella, who is the author of the book called Make Money Your Honey. She also writes and coaches people. She focuses on millennials. And so far, we've been talking about some of the reasons that maybe millennials aren't doing the right things with their money. Amanda, I want to just comment on something you just said. You're saying maybe later I will start to get involved in individual stocks. So I have to tell you that I've in my real my day job in real life, I'm a financial advisor. I've been doing this for about 25 years. And to this day, it is very rare that I will buy an individual stock on my own, even though I talk about stocks all the time and I actually like it. I find it interesting. But I'll use, funds. Mostly for myself, I use money managers. For my clients, I do that. I just think that, diversifying using things like you mentioned, ETFs, exchange traded funds is a good way to spread out the risk. And I don't think that you actually ever have to get excited about picking stocks or researching stocks. And that's one of the things I believe that kind of frightens people away. They go, oh, if I have to invest, what do I know about the stock market?
Right.
And then they don't even get started. I guess that's a real fear. That is fear keeping people from doing the right thing.
Right. And I think there's oftentimes tell people if you're going to money management, period, not just investing, like you got to keep your emotions out of this. And investing is one of those areas where you definitely got to keep your emotions out of it.
Yeah, that is very true. All right, so let's go on about some of the, some of the other things that maybe millennials find intimidating. And I'll give you an example. In my day job, again, as a financial advisor, I'll often talk to someone about the importance of saving and investing. And they'll say, yeah, but I can't make ends meet. How can I put money aside? And that's what you were discussing before. And then, as soon as I mention the word budgeting, I can just tell like they're shutting down. How is it that these ideas of budgeting and saving and investing can just be made to seem less overwhelming?
So one of the things that I like to do, I don't have a budget. I do values-based spending, right? Or values-based budgeting, whatever you want to call it. But basically, it's not necessarily a strict budget because that tends to repel people. Instead, I have found that once someone figures out what actually matters to them and what they truly value, and then they make money goals based on that, then the budgeting, in air quotes, kind of starts to happen more naturally. Because it doesn't seem like such a restriction anymore because you're clear on what it is that you care about and what it is you actually want.
Does this actually work? It sounds to me like someone might say, yeah, I want season tickets to the Yankees and, I also want a vacation or two this year because I deserve it. And,
right. Well, you have to be you have to be self-aware. I think that's really important. So I'll just use myself an example. To me, the only reason I do anything is freedom, right? That's the whole thing. I run my business because I want to be free. I run a business from my laptop because I want to be able to travel, which goes back to freedom. But it's just as freeing to me to have money in emergency savings as it is to have a travel fund. Because if I have money in emergency savings, I feel free insofar as that, if I have some sort of an emergency, which it has happened to me, where I need emergency surgery, right? I know I have the freedom to pay for it and not to go into debt. That in and of itself is a sense of freedom. And I think people tend to think, well, it's either or, and it's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm. So comment a little bit more on debt, because I know that you have an opinion on credit cards that some people don't really hold by. What is your model for using credit cards for millennials?
Oh, I love credit cards. I've gotten so much free stuff from credit cards. I think credit is a really great tool if you know how to leverage it. I've gotten over 15 free flights thanks to credit cards. I was hanging out waiting for a flight in a lounge that I don't even have to pay for access for thanks to one of my credit cards, So I think the idea with credit cards is there's this whole thing, oh, credit cards are evil, you're going to get yourself into trouble, and quite frankly, a lot of people have. But the credit card isn't the problem. Credit is not the problem. It's a lack of self-awareness that's the problem. And then that's where the values-based spending comes in, because if you start getting clear on what matters to you, you also start becoming more self-aware.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if that's an easier said than done kind of thing. Were you always like this? Did your parents teach you this? How did you become that way?
No, I was not always like this. I spent every dime I made in college. My parents did teach me to be risk averse. So the credit cards, I was scared of them. I'm not going to be honest. It actually was a friend of mine who was like traveling all over the world and doing whatever he wanted. And I was like, how are you doing this? And then he started telling me about the credit card points. And I had a lot of the same concerns. I was like, well, how do I do that without getting into debt? Or, how do I do that without jacking up my credit? And he started teaching me. So I was like, all right, let me get that one credit card and see if this actually works. And I realized it did. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. This is actually a really powerful tool if you know how to use it. So I had to like slowly train myself to get there. Does that make sense?
All right, I hear. My warning on this is, listen, when things work and they go well, it's like when people says, yeah, someone says, I'm going to trade options. I just say, that's a pretty bad idea. You'll probably lose most of your money. But if it works out well, then everything works out fine and it'll do well. I just, I look at the statistics and it makes me worried because my experience is having, spoken to people about their finances for a couple of decades already. People tend just to be too emotional. They want things, and the credit card is there to give you everything you want when you want it. And, there's no such thing as delayed gratification when you have a credit card.
Right.
And I just don't think that's good for, a person's health, let's say. Financial health, that is.
There's two things I want to say to that. Number one, there's some people who just can't handle a credit card. Like, it's a personality thing, right? Like, I have friends who literally cannot walk into a store with a credit card in their pocket. They just can't do it, right? But again, they're self-aware enough to know that. So they don't even bother bringing one with them. Does that make sense?
That's a good idea. Okay.
Right. But they had to do that work to even realize, oh, this is an issue for me. Right. And then number two, in terms of the emotions, I'm going to give you all a tip that sounds like it has nothing to do with finance, but I'll explain how it does. Meditate or do yoga or do some sort of mindfulness practice, because it makes you less reactive. A lot of people end up overspending, like you said, because of emotions. Oh, I had a rough week at work, so I deserve to jack up my credit card. Does that make sense? When it's like, no, everyone has a rough week at work. Chill out. It doesn't mean you need to go spend money. But if you're doing some sort of practice like that, or practices where you're becoming more self-aware of your emotions and how you react to things, you're able to monitor it. Or you're able to catch yourself in that moment, or at the very least, you become less reactive. And sometimes that 30-second delay between something happening and your reaction is all you need to make a better decision.
Wow. Okay, that is a good tip. That's a tip, Amanda, we're going to have to stop with because I see we're running overtime. But tell us, in the last few seconds, how can people follow you and follow your work?
So you can just go to my website, amandaabella.com. You can sign up for the email list. You'll get a free financial class where I talk about all my favorite tools and apps for better managing your finances, including investing. And you'll also be notified when I have new podcast episodes going live or new reviews of financial tools that are out there. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Amanda Abella. Everything's just my name. So amandaabella.com, Instagram's my name, Twitter's my name. Just Google me, you'll find me.
All right, and we will put show notes. We will put links to that at the show notes of today's show. Amanda Abella, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.